A fat Karen tried to attack a veteran in front of the royal guards, but she never expected this. A loud, shrill voice cut through the air. The fat Karen yelled, "Hey, you! Yeah, I'm talking to you." She shoved past people, forcing her way to the front, her face twisted in frustration. The royal guard in front of her didn't move. He stood, stone-faced, silent, gripping his rifle. Karen's lip curled in outrage. She stepped even closer, her voice rising with entitlement. "Oh, so you're just going to stand there and ignore me?" she shouted directly at the soldier. A few people in the crowd chuckled. Others raised their phones. This was about to get messy. Then Karen stepped over the security barrier. Gasps rippled through the crowd. She wasn't supposed to do that. A security officer immediately took notice. "Ma'am, step back right now," he called out. Karen snapped her head toward him. "Don't tell me what to do," she snapped. She waved him off like he was nothing. Then she turned her fury back to the royal guard, jabbing a finger toward his face. "I paid thousands of dollars to be here," she screeched. "The least you can do is take a picture with me. What, you think you're better than us?" The soldier remained still. Karen's face turned red. She took another step forward, almost chest to chest with the guard. "I'm talking to you, you little brat!" she barked, her voice shrill and shaking with rage. Then another voice spoke, deep, steady, and firm. "Step back, lady. You don't know what you're doing." Karen spun around. A man in his 80s stood nearby. His posture was strong, his eyes sharp with experience. He wasn't just any bystander, he was a veteran. Karen's eyes narrowed. "And who do you think you are?" she sneered. The veteran stared at her unfazed. Karen huffed, crossing her arms. "Mind your own business, old man," she spat. "Nobody cares about you." The crowd murmured in shock. The veteran didn't flinch. Karen's hands balled into fists. Then, without thinking, she raised her hand. The crowd gasped. She was about to do something she would instantly regret. But how did it get to this point? Let's go back just a few minutes earlier. The fat Karen had already been fuming before she even got close to the royal guard. She had been pacing near the crowd, loudly complaining to anyone who would listen. "This is ridiculous," she huffed. "We came all this way, and these lazy guards won't even talk?" A group of teenagers, standing nearby, snickered, recording her meltdown. "They just stand there all day, doing nothing," Karen scoffed. "How is that even a real job?" Her husband, a quiet man with an exhausted look, stood a few steps away, clearly too embarrassed to get involved. Then Karen's eyes landed on one particular guard. A young soldier, tall, stoic, gripping his rifle with perfect discipline. Karen grinned wickedly. "Oh, I'm going to make this one crack," she muttered under her breath. She marched straight toward him, shoving through the crowd. A security officer, standing nearby, noticed immediately, raising a hand to stop her. "Ma'am, please stay behind the barrier." Karen ignored him. She was locked in on her target now. She stepped past the barrier, breaking one of the biggest rules at Buckingham Palace. A few tourists gasped, whispering nervously. That's when the veteran noticed her. Standing off to the side, the 80-year-old military veteran had been quietly observing everything. His sharp eyes narrowed. He had seen this type of entitlement before. He shook his head. "She's about to make a big mistake." And he was right, because in just a few seconds, Karen was going to do something she would never be able to take back. Karen had already crossed the line, but she was just getting started. The fat Karen stomped right up to the royal guard, practically breathing down his neck. She glared up at him, her eyes burning with frustration. "Hello? Can you even hear me?" she yelled. The soldier didn't blink. His grip on the rifle remained firm. His face was unshaken. Karen's nostrils flared. "You think you're so tough, huh?" she snapped, standing there like some kind of big shot, ignoring people. She stepped even closer. Her face was inches from his. The crowd muttered nervously. People held their phones up, filming every second. A security officer rushed forward again, his voice more serious now. "Ma'am, I'm warning you. Step back immediately." Karen spun toward him, her face twisted with rage. "Or what?" she screamed. "What are you going to do? Arrest me for talking?" The veteran's voice cut through the air once more. "It's not just talking, lady," he said firmly. "You're disrespecting a soldier." Karen's head snapped toward him. She let out a cruel laugh. "A soldier? Please! These guys are just standing here like statues. This isn't the army. It's a joke." A few people in the crowd gasped. Even the security officer's expression darkened. The veteran took a slow step forward, his eyes locked on Karen. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he said calmly. Karen crossed her arms, smirking. "Oh yeah?" she sneered. "And what would you know, old man?" The veteran held his ground. "Because I served," he said simply. "Unlike you, I know what it means to stand for something." Karen rolled her eyes. "Oh, boo-hoo," she mocked. "Let me guess. You want a medal? You think that makes you special?" The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Some people shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered in shock. Karen's voice got louder. "Why should I care about some old man who fought in some war 100 years ago?" she scoffed. The veteran's expression didn't change, but the tension in the air was suffocating. The security officer moved closer. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. Step back, now." But Karen was too far gone. She turned back to the Royal Guard, eyes full of spite. And then she did something no one expected. She lifted her hand and shoved the veteran. The crowd gasped so loudly it was almost deafening. A collective shockwave rippled through the people watching. The Royal Guard shifted. For the first time, he moved. Karen's smirk faltered. She realized too late. She had just made the biggest mistake of her life. Karen had just done the unthinkable. She shoved an 80-year-old veteran, and now she was about to face the consequences. The crowd stood frozen in shock. Gasps echoed through the air. People stared in disbelief, their phones held high, capturing every second. The Royal Guard shifted again, his rifle adjusted slightly. Karen's smirk faded. For the first time, real fear flickered in her eyes. "Oh, what? What are you all looking at?" she snapped, her voice suddenly unsure. The veteran staggered slightly from the push, but he didn't fall. Instead, he stood his ground, his piercing eyes locked onto Karen. The security officer rushed forward, his hand on his radio. "Ma'am, that was assault," he barked. "You are in serious trouble." Karen threw her hands up, laughing nervously. "Oh, please, I barely touched him," she scoffed. The veteran straightened up. "That barely was enough," he said coldly. The air was thick with tension. The Royal Guard suddenly took a step forward. His massive black boot hit the pavement with a loud stomp. Karen jumped, her face drained of colour. The crowd erupted in whispers. This was serious. The Royal Guards never move unless absolutely necessary. But this time, the soldier had taken a step, and he wasn't finished. The soldier lifted his rifle slightly, angling it toward Karen. It wasn't an attack, it was a warning. But to Karen, it felt like the walls were closing in. Her breath hitched. She took an instinctive step backward. "Hey, I was just joking," she stammered. The Royal Guard's face remained cold, unshaken. Karen swallowed hard. The security officer grabbed his radio. "We need additional personnel at the front gates. We have a disturbance, possible detainment required." Karen whirled around. "Detention? For what?" she shrieked. She pointed aggressively at the veteran. "He started it. He got in my face first." The crowd erupted in boos. People shouted back. "You shoved a veteran," someone yelled. "Shame on you," another voice called. Karen's face burned red. Her head darted around, desperate for an escape. But there was no way out. The security officer stepped closer. "Ma'am, I suggest you cooperate." Karen let out a shaky laugh. Oh, come on. You're not really going to arrest me over this, right?" she pleaded. The veteran tilted his head slightly. "Actions have consequences," he said simply. Karen whipped back toward the Royal Guard. "You're just gonna let this happen," she screamed. "Say something." The soldier remained silent. Karen gritted her teeth. Her hands balled into fists. She was about to snap again, but then something happened that shut her down instantly. A high-ranking officer emerged from the gates. His polished uniform, sharp eyes, and commanding presence sent a wave of dread through Karen. He walked with purpose, and he was coming straight toward her. Karen froze. For the first time, she realized just how bad this was. Her knees wobbled. The officer stopped just a few feet away. He gave a sharp nod to the Royal Guard, an unspoken command. The soldier stepped back into place, returning to his original stance. The officer then turned his attention to Karen. His voice was calm, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "You have violated the rules of this establishment. You have harassed our soldiers, and you have assaulted a military veteran." Karen's lip trembled. The officer's expression remained ice cold. "Do you have anything to say for yourself?" Karen opened her mouth, but no words came out. She was completely speechless, and for the first time, she looked truly, utterly terrified. Karen thought she could get away with it, but she was dead wrong. And now she was about to face the full consequences of her actions. Karen thought she was untouchable. She thought she could get away with shoving an 80-year-old veteran and mocking the Royal Guard. But now she was about to learn a lesson she'd never forget. Karen stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, but no words came out. The high-ranking officer's piercing eyes never left her. The crowd was silent now. Everyone was waiting. The officer took a single step forward. "You have violated the sacred rules of Buckingham Palace," he said firmly. Karen's chest rose and fell quickly. Her confidence? Gone. Her voice shook as she stammered. I didn't know." The officer didn't flinch. "Ignorance is not an excuse," he said coldly. Karen's hands trembled. She whipped toward her husband. "Honey, say something," she cried. Her husband looked at the ground. He wouldn't even meet her eyes. Karen's breath hitched. She spun back to the officer. "Please, it was just a little push," she pleaded. The veteran shook his head. "A little push," he repeated. His voice was calm, but behind it was years of discipline, strength, and dignity. "I fought for my country," the veteran said. "I lost brothers in battle, and you just put your hands on me because you didn't get what you wanted." Karen's lip quivered. The officer raised a hand towards security. "Remove her!" Karen's eyes widened. "Whoa, wait, what?" she shrieked. Two security officers grabbed her arms. Karen started thrashing. "No, you can't do this. I'm a paying tourist." The officer didn't even blink. "And now you're a paying tourist who just got banned." The crowd erupted in applause. Karen kicked her legs wildly. "You can't ban me," she screamed. "I'll sue." The security officers didn't stop. They dragged her toward the gates. Karen's face was beet red. She screeched at the top of her lungs. "This isn't fair! You can't do this to me!" As she was dragged away, the veteran let out a quiet breath. The Royal Guard never moved again. He was back to standing perfectly still. The high-ranking officer turned to the veteran. He gave a small, respectful nod. The veteran returned it. No words were needed. The crowd broke into cheers. People clapped for the veteran. A group of teenagers high-fived each other. And Karen was gone. But her humiliation would live on. Forever. Because thousands of phones had just recorded everything. And the internet? It never forgets. But just when everyone thought it was over, something happened that no one expected. Karen had been dragged away in shame. The crowd cheered. The veteran stood tall. The Royal Guard never broke his composure. But just when everyone thought it was over, something unexpected happened. The security officers disappeared behind the gates, taking Karen with them. People in the crowd began murmuring. "Did she really just get banned?" someone whispered. "Serves her right," another person chuckled. But then a new whisper spread through the crowd. Someone pointed toward the palace gates. "Wait, is she getting arrested?" A man in a sharp black uniform had just stepped out from a security post, a higher-ranking officer. He spoke briefly to the guards. Then one of the officers nodded and reached for his handcuffs. The crowd erupted in shock. "No way!" someone gasped. "Is she actually going to jail for this?" The veteran watched in silence. A small smirk crossed his lips. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, like he knew justice was finally being served.